It took me a few years of writing and publishing novels before I was earning a full-time income. In this video, I'm going to talk about my strategy and how I did it. Maybe you're trying to become a writer yourself, or maybe you just want to know the story of my writing career, but I hope you find this useful and interesting. I always wanted to be a writer, a novelist specifically, but I didn't really try very hard. Still, throughout my 20s, I was always working on some sort of fiction. I must have written hundreds of thousands of words. I completed a historical fantasy novel, but I was never happy with it and kept rewriting it over and over. I wrote dozens of short stories. I started lots of novels too, and I'd usually get a few thousand words in and I'd stop. Some of them were about 40,000 words, but I'd run out of interest or run out of steam. I had a desire to write, but my planning was non-existent. Although I wrote a thriller novel too, writing with a specific market in mind and fully intending to get it published. But I never quite finished the rewrites and the polishing up, because it wasn't a genre or a story that I was truly interested in. But when I reached my 30s and my first child was born, I decided I had to actually come up with a plan. After all, I was a father now, and it was time to get my act together. I told myself I would give it everything I had for 10 years. I would write and publish as many books as I could over the next 10 years before I gave up. Although I didn't intend to fail. In fact, I thought it might very well take me the full 10 years, but that I would definitely make it. Because I'd started looking into self-publishing. Amazon had this thing called Kindle Direct Publishing, where you could upload your ebook and sell it through Amazon. There was no need for agents or publishing deals. So I thought all I needed to do was to write loads of books, and surely I'd make it eventually. So this was my plan. I've had this notebook for about 20 years, where I write down story ideas. And that old notebook is pretty much full up now. I went through it and made a short list of story ideas that I thought would be fun to write and that I thought people would want to read. And they were ideas that would carry over multiple novels. Each idea had to be a novel series, because one-off standalone books would be hard to make successful, or so I thought. I got it down to 4 ideas in multiple genres. I thought that I would start with the least commercial idea and work up to the most likely to be successful. That way I could learn the ropes, learn how to improve my writing, learn how to publish as I went along, saving my best ideas for last. And whether that was the right way to go about it, I don't know, but it worked out okay in the end. My first idea was to publish children's fantasy fiction. I'd already written a short story for my nephew's birthday years before, and so I thought I'd turn that into a series. I wrote 3 of those novels in a year and no one bought them. It was entirely my fault, because it turned out that children just weren't interested in a gunpowder fantasy series set during the English Civil War. I just didn't understand the market, and eventually I unpublished them, I took them down. But that was fine, they'd served their purpose. It was a learning experience, and so I went on with my next idea. In 2015, I published a historical fantasy novel called Vampire Crusader. And it sold basically 0 copies. Maybe 30, maybe 100 over the next few weeks, I don't know exactly. Still, on blind faith, a few months later, I published a sequel called Vampire Outlaw, and predictably that sold even less. I even tried to give the first book away for free, but people didn't even want to read it for nothing. But that was fine, I thought. I'd move on to the next idea. And in 2016 I published a science fiction novel called Orb Station Zero. By this point I had very little optimism. I knew I was in it for the long haul. I knew I would have to publish at least 20 and maybe 50 novels before I saw any great success, and I thought it probably would take the full 10 years. But I published the novel and started work on the next one straight away. But in fact, Orb Station Zero did quite well. surprisingly, it sold thousands. By this point, I'd started to understand the market a bit, started to understand cover design, and I'd learnt about advertising on Amazon and Facebook. After this surprising success, I wrote 2 prequel stories to the sci-fi novel. Now, this was a terrible mistake, and I should have written a sequel instead, but I was led astray by bad advice on the internet from people who only wanted to sell me something. But I had started to apply what I'd learned about cover design and marketing to my previously published books. My Facebook adverts especially were a great success, and that old failure of a novel, Vampire Crusader, started selling very well, and the sequel was selling too. So I wrote another book in the series called Vampire Khan, and the momentum continued. So I kept writing and publishing, and The Immortal Night Chronicles became my greatest success so far, with 8 novels published and well over 50,000 copies sold. Over this period, I also wrote 2 more sci-fi books, and eventually put all 5 of my sci-fi stories together into the Galactic Arena digital box set, and that alone sold over 10,000 copies. My most recent series, started in 2020, is Gods of Bronze, which is a fantasy series set in the Bronze Age. It takes place in the same continuity as my Immortal Night Chronicles series, but both series stand alone. In that series so far, I've published 2 novels and a free prequel story that people get when they join my email newsletter. And you can check out all my books for yourself via the links in the video description. Anyway, it didn't take me 10 years in the end. It took me 5 years to make a full-time income. But that was 5 years of working a day job and writing every single night, 7 days a week with no days off ever. For a few years, I even wrote on Christmas Day and New Year's Eve after everyone else had gone to bed. I was completely focused, completely dedicated, to an unhealthy degree perhaps, but in the end I was successful, and that was what I wanted. I would like to talk more about the specifics of all these stories. I want to share everything I've learned about writing and publishing, the mistakes I've made in the writing and storytelling, and the knowledge I've gained and how I've improved over the years. Things like how to structure a story or a scene, how to write dialogue or action, and how to come up with great characters and how to give them engaging story arcs, the differences between writing in certain genres, how to defeat writer's block, and so on. If that's of interest to you, then please subscribe to the channel and let me know what questions you have in the comments. Thank you for watching.